The most common question right now regarding classic cars is, are Ford V8 engines better than Chevy's small block engines? And historically speaking, what is the main difference between how Ford did things and Chevy? And the general answer is to say, hey, Chevy and Ford both made some great engines. And actually, most of the comments will say that. There's not as much back and forth as I was expecting. But the one difference with Ford is the engine families. See, when the Ford Edsel did not succeed, I think Ford put more of their emphasis into the different engine families, where Chevy and General Motors started to consolidate with the corporate engines. So Ford had to do a little more experimentation to keep in step with what Chevy was doing. So a lot of the vehicles you see here are examples of the 2.3 Pinto engine or the turbocharged Lima engine or the 4.6 SOHC modular engine. And just to give some perspective, the Model T was the original pioneer of a mass-produced vehicle that sold 4 million units in 2023 and 2024. Ford sold over 4 million Model Ts. And then the modern assembly line, which is essentially a conveyor belt system, allowed them to build vehicles like the Thunderbird in only 90 minutes, where before the modern assembly line, that took up over 13 hours. So by the time you got to the Ford Mustang and the Ford Thunderbird, Ford had really perfected manufacturing. That is really what they were known for, where Chevy, when they came out with their first pushrod engine, the small block is really their claim to fame. Yes, Chevy has a bunch of great engines. Ford has a bunch of great engines. But if you wanted to actually make it an argument, I would say Chevy's small block, because today if you look at a Silverado or a GMC Sierra or a Cadillac Escalade, any vehicle, they still use overhead valve pushrod engines, where you can see from the Ford Turbo Coupe, like you see there, Ford now uses the EcoBoost, which is essentially a modern version. They were using single overhead cam, single turbo back in the 70s and 80s, and now they use a twin turbo dual overhead cam. So Ford really did a lot more evolution and took a lot more risks with their engine technology. And from what I have read, they tested these technologies overseas in Ford of Europe, and then they developed them at their plants in the United States, whereas Chevy really stuck to the old